Hi, I'm Daniel,
And I'm Jamie.
and we're Reading Ambassadors. We're here to talk to Mr Mallén, a fantastic modern languages teacher here at Brecon High, about books, ebooks, and audiobooks, and his love of reading. This interview is for the library's Prêt radio podcast, which you can find on YouTube. So, Mr Mallén, ¿cómo estás usted?
Estoy muy bien, gracias.
So, you are Spanish, if you didn't already know.
Of course.
And we wondered if you could tell our listeners briefly about some of the great books by Spanish authors. Most people in this country only know of Don Quixote by De Cervantes and maybe 100 Years of Solitude by Marquez. Our librarian, Miss Stewart, says she's read Isabel Allende's A Long Petal of the Sea, but that author's from Chile.
Yeah, that's true. So, good attempt at pronouncing that, Daniel. Don Quixote. Yeah, that's how you're supposed to say it. So, Don Quixote is actually a great book. It's a parody on, books about knights and princesses and stuff like that. And 100 Years of Solitude is actually a book that I've read myself. It's about an imaginary world, and it's supposed to depict like the modern society of the 20th century. But yeah, for example, one of my favorite books in the Spanish language is a book called La Vida es Sueño by a guy called Calderón de la Barca, who was a playwright and a poet. And it's about a guy who is locked up in a cell, and just to discover that it's his dad that locked him up there to prevent him from getting to the throne, because somebody had predicted that he would be really mean once he ascended to the power. And yeah, so it's like a clairvoyant. And yeah, so she's just locked up to prevent that from happening, and it ends up happening anyway, because it just shows that human beings cannot escape their destiny. Yeah, and another book that I really like as well is a book called Rimas y Leyendas by an author called Gustavo Adolfo Becker, who was also a poet and from the Romanesque, so that would be 18th century, yes, 18th century, exactly. And he was very approachable, and he had a style that his books have always been, well, actually, he only lived 36 years, but what he produced while he was alive has always been very popular. He used to write a lot of what he called legends, which are always very phantasmagorical, mysterious. And then his rhymes, as he calls his poets, are also very nice, always regretting like his misfortune in love in general. So I've always quite enjoyed him. Towards the more modern books, Isabel Allende, yes, I have not read anything by Isabel Allende, but I have read stuff, for example, by a Spanish author called Almudena Grandes, who died in 2021 from breast cancer. And she had a mission in life, which was to show the empowerment of women, and she did that very successfully in her novels. So yeah, that's a little bit of Spanish literature from me to you.
So, you're a modern languages teacher. Most people seem to get the importance of reading while studying English and, say, history, but less people understand the impact poor literacy has on subjects like science, computing, and maths, or even your subject. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think literacy is extremely important across the board for all subjects, and I once attended a conference where we discussed the importance of language, because I studied translation, and we were talking about the importance of communication in general. And even one of the points that was brought up was, even if you're a scientist and you have to produce a paper to communicate and disperse the results of your research, you need to do that using your language. So you need to put that in writing. You need to use language to communicate those results. So it's extremely important, even when, okay, well, maybe in maths you think, okay, that's not going to be so important, but actually everything you're communicating when a teacher is trying to explain how, to work your sums out or something, they're also using the language. And you're going to get a maths problem, and that's also going to be a chunk of text. So actually, your literacy comes in to play again in that context. So for me, literacy is a key thing for all the subjects in the curriculum. Like I've just given you a few examples because you'd think, okay, because they're not, they're technical subjects or more science oriented, but it's actually very important that we developed our literacy, and we can do that through reading. Obviously, everything will have an impact. Well, exactly. Yeah, and of course, I mean, of course, for my subject is also very important because even though you start learning a language from zero, pretty much, you still need to be able to understand. Like sometimes when I give my students like a reading task or something, and I say to them, you have to read between the lines, not just what the text says, but you have to infer what the text is communicating, not what the text is saying.
So you know you're a very big reader, clearly. Have you
Hmm.
always been a big reader since you were a boy?
Actually, yes, I have always been a big reader. When I was a boy, I remember in my primary school, we had like a competition. So we had like a library in the classroom. So there was a shelf with books, and you could just help yourself to one. And each book was rated by a color, so they would be ranked from easiest to most difficult, and you would start from the easiest one. So for example, like I think it was green, and then you would work your way up until you got to the golden level, and that was such an achievement, and you would get very excited because you'd get like a sticker, to prove that you'd got to the highest level possible. And I always got to like the highest level. And of course, yeah. And then of course, the level of difficulty would get increasingly difficult as you went, from, the lower years in primary up to, the very top. So yeah. But that's something that I've always enjoyed reading. And I'm a person that enjoys a book. So you know how, with the appearance of ebooks and stuff, but I've always been somebody that needs to hold a book in his hands. That's me.
So, student reading ambassadors try to promote reading to our peers. Why do you think adults modelling reading for pleasure is so important for our families? And do you use the staff reading door sign?
Actually, I need to get better at that because I don't have the staff door sign. Sometimes I feel like it would be superfluous because most likely I'm just going to put a random title in Spanish and people are just going to walk past my door and they're just not going to pay any attention to it. But I think it might be important anyway just to show it up there. It's extremely important that we model a behavior that we want to see happening in our pupils, because our pupils will most likely look up to us, and if they see that we're not doing it, they will just won't see the point. And I talk from personal experience as well, because I used to admire some of my teachers. So I would be like, oh, I want to be like this person. So if this person is doing it, must be that this is what I should follow as well. So yeah, definitely something for me to improve on.
Excellent. So do you have a favourite book or comic or story of all time, and why would you like it so much?
That's a difficult question. I don't think I can really mention an author that I particularly like. Well, I've mentioned already some of the classics and everything. Um, of course, I've enjoyed and read and reread the Harry Potter books like three times at least each book. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. I mean, they were part of my childhood and my adolescence. So I've always really enjoyed the whole magic, fantasy, themed books. And there was a book called as well, The Eight, by I think the author was Catherine Neville or something like that. And it was about, it's historical novel essentially. I've always liked historical fiction, which is, and it represented some scenes from the French Revolution, but everything was seamlessly integrated into the fiction. And this is a book that, by the way, I would recommend. But yeah, this is the sort of genre that I'm most into.
So what are you currently reading?
Where am I currently reading? Well, because I'm studying at university and I'm studying Spanish literature, I have a lot of books to read. So right now I'm just reading some Spanish drama books, so like there's a lot of them I have to read actually. And I'm also studying Latin American literature, so yeah, I can't actually remember any of the titles that I'm supposed to read, but yeah. Um, and of course, I have to read a lot of textbooks because that's why it's required for my uni course. So yeah, I started reading a book called Yellowface, which is quite a modern book. I bought it at the airport, and I was quite enjoying it. It shows in detail how the editing process of a book works, and it's basically an author that fakes being the writer of a book that somebody else wrote, and there's like a whole lot of drama behind it. And that was like my most recent book, and I've just finished it. So uh, probably I'll just buy another book soon.
Another quick question for you here, just while you're saying that. Do you like prefer to read a book in Spanish or in English? Or
Right, well, I always learn things when I read books, particularly like vocabulary and stuff that even in Spanish that I haven't seen before, and I don't know maybe how it's used. I enjoy reading in English now. I must admit that when I was a language student and I could not understand half the words that I was reading, I would get very stressed because I would just be underlining them and then checking them in a dictionary, and that would just take the pleasure away from the reading experience. So I just at some point I was like, what, I'll figure it out by the context or whatever. But right now, I enjoy reading in both languages, even Catalan. Catalan is a language that I also enjoy reading in. Yeah, and I could tell you about one of my favorite books in Catalan of all times, which is called I think in English would be the rough translation, Typescript of the Second Origin. And it's about it's set in apocalyptic times, and basically the world has been destroyed, and the only two survivors in that town where the book is set are a black boy and a white girl, and basically they just have to do what they can to preserve the survival of the species. So it's actually very interesting. Yes, definitely recommend it.
So, do you always finish a book even if you hate it?
No, for example, I never finished Twilight. I read the first 50 pages and then I decided I'd had enough. So, yeah, it's just something I like. I don't mind a romantic story, but it was just too much for me. And then at some point, I was like, nah, this is not fruitful. So I'm just going to put it down and then, try to find something else that I'm more interested in. But yeah.
what do you think about ebooks and audiobooks? I know you said that you prefer to have a paper book.
Yeah.
Do you think they're beneficial to other people?
Yeah, well, for me, it's all about reading from the screen. I realize that sometimes, even when I'm, you know, about to turn in an assignment for uni and stuff, I always miss out things when I read from the screen, and there's typos and stuff like that. So for me, it's definitely not useful, but I think that some people have actually, found it extremely helpful to have, and also it saves on paper, so it's an eco-friendly initiative for sure. I bought a Kindle once, but hardly ever use it. So yeah, but I think it's good if you think you can read. But definitely, I would definitely recommend you get a proper ebook, because if you're trying to read from a tablet or a phone, it's just like the brightness is just going to end up annoying you. Yeah, it's going to tire your eyes at some point. So yeah.
And if you've met any authors, who's the most interesting one you've ever met?
Well, I met an author once. It was in Barcelona a few years ago for St George's Day, because that is a really important day for us, and it's not World Book, but it's the World International Book Day, I think. And he wrote one of my favorite novels in Spanish, which is the Cathedral of the Sea, and again historical fiction. So very, very impressive, and I just yeah, he was actually a very friendly guy. We shook hands and he signed my book, and we were just chatting for a bit, and I just told him how much I admired like all the documentation process that he had gone through to make sure that all the historical facts were accurate for his novel, and everything. So it was a really, really good experience.
And finally, last question. How do you say Prêt in Spanish? Is it listo para leer?
Yes, yeah, well done. Listo para leer. I would probably, if I had to make something a bit more idiomatic, I'd probably say prepárate para leer or preparado para leer, something like that. But yeah, no, that's a pretty good translation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for letting us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.